Welcome to the second episode of Consciously Open. Today I'm joined by Gabriel Mbanefo, founder and CEO of Entrepreneur Lego. Gabriel, hello. Thank you for
Hey,
joining
Kristina.
me.
Well, thanks for having me.
It is exciting to have you on the podcast because we're sharing the podcast on YouTube as well. And just before we went live, you reminded me of something that we spoke about a couple of years ago, and you said that we should start a channel on YouTube. And now we're actually going to be sharing this conversation on YouTube.
Yeah. No, I remember saying that you should do a YouTube thing. I wasn't so sure about it myself. It's not really, something I'm that used to, but here we are. So,
I am very excited about this conversation because you run your businesses very much behind the scenes. And a couple of months ago, we hosted an in person founder fireside chat, which was a massive success. So many people were inspired by your story. And today, I would like us to speak about not just your journey of starting your company first in the United States of America and then starting another company in London, but also about the the journey in terms of the challenges that you have had to overcome, the biases that you have faced yourself, and also biases by society, and how you were able to create sustainably profitable business. Because in the startup world, working in the startup world, there's so many companies that never reach a stage of sustainable profitability. But we're not going to be speaking just about numbers today and just about biases. We're going to speak about you and your fascinating journey. You come from a family of lawyers. Your grandfather was knighted by the Queen, and he was the first Igbo lawyer in Nigeria. Your dad continued the legacy, and you decided to set out completely on your own, leaving Nigeria, relocating to the United States of America. What inspired you to make such a move?
yeah, I mean, with my family, yes, there are lawyers. As you correctly stated, my granddad was a lawyer, dad was a lawyer. But there wasn't really a family firm as such. Um, they all kind of started out in their own way. Grandfather mainly did property law, father did shipping law. So, you know, we kind of did different things. But for me, um, I started, I went into university to study law back in 2000. So it's been a while. And throughout, there were several, roadblocks one's faced and challenges. And throughout, it was I always had this feeling that one was doing things to either keep dad happy or because it's the right thing to do or it's prestigious and so on. And those weren't strong motivating factors. Um, for going to say the profession I had, consistency is key. And to be consistent, you've got to enjoy what you're doing, or at least got to have pride in what you're doing. Um, and so I felt it had to be something, I had to be doing things when I wake up every morning that I want to do and feel motivated to do. And when looking at one's options, it seemed that, the best way to do that was to set out on one's own. Um, it was a kind of high risk, high reward frame. I had in the past, I made what I felt was a mistake. Um, in 2007, and this is how the whole New York thing came about, because yes, my family do not have a history in the US. I was born in England, lived in Nigeria for 7 years, but lived in England, had all my legal training and so on in England. Um, and the I was applied, but after I did my master's, because a lot of that was international commercial law, so I did a lot of international IP work and looked at the work with WIPO. So I applied for an internship with WIPO. Um, Initially, I didn't hear anything from a year, so for a year from them, and I didn't think it had gone through. And then I randomly hear from them and say, "Oh, I'd applied in Geneva, but they said, oh, we've got an internship opportunity in our New York office. Would you like to go?" And it just was at the right time. It fitted neatly, before another job I was about to start. So I went and did it, and I had a great time over there. So that's what brought New York on the map. Um, but Also, at that time, so it was a 3 month internship, and there was talk of, if I wanted to stay on work for them, there may be a possibility. Obviously, I couldn't start immediately because they didn't let interns just go in and apply for jobs straight away. And I already had another job lined up in the UK. So it's like, oh, that's a job I would like to do, but I have the safety net of this other job in the UK, which, wasn't really my main cup of thing, but is bird in hand. And I took the safe option at that point. And yeah, as you know, I was working from in the UK for almost 3 years. And I regretted it because it was like I had the safe option and it was almost like I compromised things. I didn't have that same motivation. So that's what really taught me that you really want to win, you've got to be prepared to take that high risk. So I guess that was kind of the background which informed that decision of going to set up my own and set up and do the work that kind of motivates me.
How were those initial steps as a black lawyer in the United States of America? And you and I had a conversation about biases, the biases that we have faced during our entrepreneurial journeys, biases against race, against nationality. I'm Eastern European, also biases against even physical appearance. And I'm curious to know, how did you, first of all, set out? What were those initial steps you took, those first experiences, if you may? And how did you establish yourself in such a competitive market, being a person of color?
Yeah, so Wesley, when you're setting out, there are a lot of those self-limiting beliefs one has, and biases play into that. So on the one hand, there was kind of, you're going to a new country, you don't have a network architecture there, you don't really know people there, you don't have an established client base there, you don't know the culture as well as the people there. You're going in there and you're competing from day one with people already established there and so on. So that's self-limiting to begin with. And then you throw on the additional, you know, potential, people have certain biases, based on skin color and so on. So all of those were, challenges that one knew one had to face. But I never saw them as barriers. I saw, these were all kind of hurdles. And so when it came to bias, it was dealt the same way as self-limiting beliefs regards, say, lack of experience in that jurisdiction. Or, and you know, I felt, these biases are there. There's something to deal with. If I said, oh, what's the point? This is going to be how it plays out. Don't even bother. Then you've already lost. So yeah, you jump in, and once you're in, you got to swim. Um, and for me, what kind of worked was acknowledging that when one's setting up the business, I mean, legal industry is, I guess, different from, if one's creating a product and so on. But at the end of the day, a person pays you because you're giving them value. And it's getting them to see the value you have to give them. And when we say there's a bias, it's saying that it's an uphill battle in getting them to see that value. But to a certain degree, how they see you, and that's based on their upbringing and how their experiences. That's relatively out of control. But also acknowledge there are a lot of things that were within one's control. Um, if you're saying I'm going to give this person value, you've got to project that. You've got to have your everything lined up to support that. Um, and with biases, it's kind of, or snap judgments, they're basing decisions on quite weak evidence generally. And it doesn't really take much to push beyond that. So it's the initial snap, but if you can push beyond that. And so, yeah, the focus for me was one, going to areas where at least one could challenge those biases, or finding routes where that was possible. And just to give an example, when I first started out, it was direct, it was to build a client base. It was direct client engagement. I set up in a co-working space, which was well, surrounded by other entrepreneurs. So you're meeting them face to face. In this digital world where it's all online um, but you're in the face to face, you're talking to the people, you're engaging with them. They may have initial biases, but they can see, okay, this person knows what he's talking about. He's competent. Um, you can get them to question those biases, and it doesn't take much because say you're in a room of five people, and say four of those people have certain bias one way, which works against you. Because obviously, one remembers that sometimes biases work in your favor. But say these are biases that are against you. But you get one of those people to change their mind, and so on. And that person, pushes beyond that and starts to work with you and gets good rapport with you. Other people start looking around, like the ones who originally had the bias, like, what does that guy see that I haven't yet? And why is that guy behaving differently? And then that also gets them to challenge the bias. So it's at times where I think where it feels a real, a barrier rather than a hurdle is if you think, oh, I'm entering this room and all of these people are going to be biased against me. And I know that. But if you consider, I just need to get one of them to flip or to change. Once you have that one and that one starts to say something different, you know, it's much easier for the other, to challenge the biases in the other. Um, and so that's the thing with my firm at the start. A lot of the business was built through referral and repeat business because, in a sense, you find an avenue where bias plays a lesser role. If, say, it was, say, online marketing and people didn't really know you, they can look at a picture and have, certain bias regarding that or make certain assumptions. But when it was more personal, it was easier to challenge those. And then once you've actually got a stream of people who are on your side, they then create that rolling, you know, snowball that gets to push beyond that for you.
There's so many things that I'm hearing that I almost want to underline and capitalize using capital letters because they're so important, especially for early stage founders who they might be, let's say, okay, female founders from different diverse backgrounds, and they might have those, it's almost like self-limiting beliefs, right? Especially if you are a person of color and you're entering a room and you're pitching and everyone else looks different from you. And statistically, less than 2% of female founders in the UK get funding. Less than 1% of Black founders get VC funding. It's a shocking statistic. And despite what the statistics show, I almost like people listening to this conversation to not let themselves be defined by the hurdles and the challenges on their journey, and to have this strong sense of this is what I'm here to do. I believe in my purpose. I believe in my vision. This is the value that I bring through my business, and this is how I'm going to lead. It is not about how I look like. It is about, or where I come from. It is about what I'm here to create as value. Because sometimes in business, yes, we like to do business with people we like and trust, but that trust is built by exchanging value, and word of mouth is the most powerful business growth strategy, like in my opinion. If I think about the co-created hub and how the platform grew, it was all about us spreading the word. And when I say us, the partners who are part of the platform, based on the experiences that we were having together. So you and I had a very interesting conversation again, I think it was couple of years ago when we first met, and I would like to share this story with everyone. Gabriel and I met at a salsa party, and it was getting really, really late. I remember this, and I was like, how am I gonna make it on time to the train station? And it was that evening where you kindly offered to give me a lift to the train station, where we started speaking about who you are, what you do. I had just returned to London and I was so inspired by your story. And I said, Gabriel, I would love to interview you on my blog. And then we met face to face for a coffee. It was almost like a mentoring chat. And I myself was facing barriers, which were more, I would say, internal rather than external. And we sat there, and I was sharing what was going on in my business and how difficult I was finding it at the time to create sustainable revenue that could lead to profitability. And you just sat there, you just looked at me, and you said, Christina, this isn't a strategy block, it's an emotional block. I will never forget this. And I just looked at you and I was like, okay, tell me how you did it. And you shared a story about leading with value, not with numbers. And I think many founders, especially at the early stages, and entrepreneurs, service entrepreneurs, we always think about, okay, I want to hit 50K this month or this year, irrespective of what your revenue goal is. And we think about the numbers first, which is strategically smart, but we forget to think about the actual value and to really connect with that place of, I would say, service and value, and adopt that mindset. This is the value that I bring. This is how I'm going to support you through my services and offers, and change, kind of have that mindset shift. Do you remember this conversation? Can you share a little bit more
Yeah,
about
yeah, yeah, yeah.
that? Because you had a
No, it's
powerful example as well.
yeah. So yeah, I remember because we're talking about you're going on about the numbers and making this revenue and getting these number of people. And uh, from from my experience, it's when you focus rather than okay. There's this odd thing with life that's um, when you're aiming for something and looking at something, it seems so elusive and evasive. But when you focus on something else, that other thing that you were struggling to get suddenly becomes much more easy to attain. So for me, like very when I first started my program, I was looking at the numbers and so on. But then you're dealing with people and you realize, um, what the numbers really represent. It's an exchange of value. You're giving something that person needs, and in return, they're giving you something else. So if you started focusing on the value and what you're giving them, i.e., rather than make yourself the center and the subject, because if you're looking at the numbers, you're thinking, I've got to make this, I've got to do that. But you start to focus on the other people. What do they need? And how can I bring value to what that other person needs? That person will reward you with an exchange of value generally. So when I started focusing on, what I deliver to people, the financial aspect is almost as if they were just like, yeah, take,
Yeah.
here, because to compensate you for what you've given them. Um, so even when it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to do this because I'm expecting that, if it's just a matter of I'm going to give this person value because I can, and it will make this person help this person. It may not happen right there and then, but down the line they will. And remember there was a client once, um, and I just helped, pro bono because I just felt, I want to help this person. But 2 years down the line, he gets to the business venture, a friend of his, and they need the general counsel, and they bring me on board. And that company that got set up was the company that's probably brought in the most revenue for my company. So, but at the time I helped him, it wasn't so much about, but it was just because you gave that value,
Yeah.
there's the reciprocal. So that a lot of the time we're so focused on myself and I've got to do this, I've got to bring in these numbers, I've got to. Whereas when you can focus more on giving out the value, that value will be reciprocated. Yeah.
Which is what business is all about in the first place. And one of the reasons why I was finding it so difficult was because every time I would think about that number, my nervous system would go on fire. And we don't speak enough about how we internally perceive money and success in terms of the effort and responsibility it would take to generate them. And if we don't feel we have the skills or the capacity or the time, our nervous system shuts down and it creates thousands of excuses and barriers which can be completely unreal to keep us safe. And this is so important that we speak about that, where if we focus on the value that we're bringing into someone's life or business, we know we can deliver that. And that creates this almost, I would describe it as inner certainty and
Mhm.
confidence. And then coming back to what we just spoke about biases, that confidence helps you to own the room, to own the space, to have that presence to generate the necessary
Absolutely.
opportunities, because it's all about presence. If I think about even and it's just so popular these days to raise money as founder, and I think some people are raising for the sake of raising, and sharing a post on LinkedIn about how much money they've raised versus what the true purpose of their business is and why they're even in it. And I just have a completely different mindset, and I think it's just so important for us to really remember what the purpose of business is in the first place, which is service, which is providing something that someone else will benefit from, and then reaching a stage of profitability, which again is something that even startups that have had millions of funding, they don't always reach. And I think it was last weekend when we had our strategy session. For those of our listeners who don't know, Gabriel is part of the Co-Created Network, and I am incredibly grateful for his guidance and support when it comes to the legal strategy of the Co-Created Hub. And last weekend, we had a strategy session and we spoke about ego. We spoke about biases, which actually inspired today's conversation. And we spoke about ego and our own biases. And you said something that I reflected on after we met, and that was how it's the CEO's bias, sometimes our own biases, that can create a barrier where we think we need to figure it out all on our own, or we always need to be the one having the solution. And I found that quite insightful because it made me think, and I said to myself, Kristina, you have a bit of that. You always want to be the one who's obviously as a solo founder. I have a little bit of that, and I'm not afraid to admit that. So have you
Hey,
worked
look,
with CEOs?
yeah, I've been guilty of that myself. But I guess it's the nature of the beast because you're starting a business, you're facing a lot of uncertainty, and the primal response to that uncertainty is control. So if I control all of this, I can minimize uncertainty and be able to sleep a bit better. So there's probably need to want to control things, but to when we look at control, we kind of have to build certain myths about it because no one can have absolute control. There's so many things that are out of your control. If you say, "Oh, I have control over this thing," that's only based on the way you perceive that thing. If you take a broader perception, you start to see the aspects that are really out of your control. But we, as founders, don't really like to see that because when we say it's out of our control, then that means uncertainty, and uncertainty means that things could go the way we don't really want them to. So yeah, I guess, but it's I guess it's how one responds to or deals with uncertainty. And rather than say, okay, this is uncertain, so I need to control it, and to control it, I need to, I'm the one who understands all of this, or get to a point where I understand it all. But realize, you can also deal with it through collaboration. Um, there are, it's not so much about having the tools at the start to deal with it, control it, but it's having access to those tools.
Yeah.
And that can mean, working with people who are particularly skilled in that particular area, or, getting a new product or building, at least having the framework to be able to deal with that. And I think that's one way that one can challenge that, uncertainty rather than saying, oh, I know all, I don't need any help. I can control it all. And, I'm the center of this business. And um,
Yes.
so,
And yes.
yeah, so I guess a lot of it is how one responds to dealing with uncertainty.
It's interesting you bring that up, uncertainty, because uncertainty is a huge part of business, also a huge part of it's always present in a sense. And if you think about what's going on in the world, we are affected, we're all affected by it. But one of the things that I would like to mention, and not by chance this podcast is called Consciously Open, because I want to be very open and transparent. That's why I started it, just to record conversations, which I usually have privately. I would always think, let's have these conversations and let's share them with the world, because I always learn a lot, and I get inspired by you, by people who I work with, and I would like for more people to have access to those conversations. So when I think about my journey and the barriers that I've had to overcome with my first business, not so much now, the second business, was that not need, but that attachment to the founder identity, and to making sure that everything came from me. My whole sense of who I was and my sense of value and self-worth was attached to that identity. And I had to learn the hard way, they call it non-attachment, to detach from who I am as a person and what the business was achieving. And when I wasn't hitting those revenue goals, when we had that conversation and I was almost in tears, and I was like, Gabriel, I do not know why it's not working. And then you said it's an emotional block. Well, it was an emotional block. Every rejection, every proposal that I sent to a client that was rejected, I internalized. I felt like I had a boyfriend and the boyfriend was breaking up with me. And this is how I would describe it, that feeling of rejection. And with my second business, the co-created hub, my mindset completely shifted, but it shifted because I was facing such a rock bottom mentally and emotionally. And I opened up to others and I said, I'm so sorry, but I may be shutting this platform down. We cannot continue working together. And when they asked me why, other founders, and I said, because of what's going on in my life, for the first time, I actually verbalized it. And they opened up back to me and they said, I get it. I've been there. And then I had this light bulb moment and I thought to myself, why are we not openly sharing our journeys? And one of the barriers that I faced was the brand that I had built in the past. We had won awards, Digital Coaching Platform of the Year. And I took so much pride in that brand. It was almost like it was all about me. And again, we shouldn't deprive ourselves of the sense of achievement and satisfaction to build something from scratch. Of course, we should shout about it and love it. It builds our characters, nothing else. But equally as much, we need to create this fine balance. It's almost like kind of, I imagine a line, and we need to remind ourselves that your business is an extension of you, it is not you. And businesses that succeed the most are built by people, not by one person. And this is what inspired the hub, the collaboration focused approach to the co-created hub.
Yeah, no, it's I completely agree though. That's with businesses, obviously you start a business and you're like, this is my baby.
Yeah.
This is a representative of me. If there's something wrong with the business, there's something wrong with me. If it's,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
also that if the business is successful, it means that I'm successful, I'm smaller. Um, and I guess, I mean, for me, I when I look at the business, it's I don't, yes, it's you pour a lot of your time, your effort into it. But I see it as something separate from myself, as in, um, I have this idea and I try to push forward this idea. Um, but if this idea doesn't work, it doesn't necessarily mean it's, myself or my fault. It's that I didn't do things the way it could have been done. So I can do it again and do it better the next time. Um, I mean, from a legal background, we have this thing, if you're debating something, where one would say, if you're expressing an opinion, you wouldn't say "in my opinion," you'd say "it is submitted that." And the difference is you're separating yourself from that opinion, that idea. So when the opinion gets attacked, it's not you personally being attacked; it's that idea being attacked. And when that opinion is attacked, it can be debated and it can be strengthened. So it's like it is submitted. I have this idea and it's being put up for consideration, and you're welcome to tear it apart because that's the only way it's going to get stronger and going to get examined properly. So it's that emotional separation. And I approach businesses the same way, um, where it's that, yes, that's the business, but I have this business idea, but it's being put up, and the market will tell me whether,
Mhm.
you know, this is something that can work. And if it doesn't work, well, then it wasn't. But it doesn't mean that I can never do, a business that works. It just means that particular one didn't. But, one can do a different one.
Exactly. It's that almost key to success, the product market fit, in a sense, or even, yeah, product market fit that everyone speaks about. And I actually think it's so important to create that distinction in your mind. However, interestingly, now this clashes with with another belief that I have, and I'm curious because you, when you shared your story when we first met, and I asked you how you got your first client, and I remember another story. This podcast today, this episode is all about stories, but these stories have stuck with me for years. That was the elevator story. Right place, right time, synchronicity. And if I think about how we met, I wasn't even meant to go to this salsa party. And I just said to myself, just go, just go. And then it was just right place, right time. And we were dancing, and it was just a very friendly environment. And it happened that I was about to miss the train, and we had this conversation, and that created this professional collaboration, which has been now going on for how long? Almost 3 years. And you're part of the platform. We are now going to be collaborating through your next venture, which I would love for you to speak more about towards the end of this conversation. But I have this thing about energy. This is something that I truly believe. And I think that sometimes it's almost like the world responds to our energy, right? And I know founders, they're part of my platform, who are so incredible at magnetizing opportunities that they just show up and they make money just by being who they are. The level of authenticity and embodiment, I am blown away by that inner power that they radiate. And then there is another part of me that says, well, okay, you're feeling this way internally, and yet there is no product market fit yet. So you're facing all these challenges on your path, or no one's responding back to you. And then I'm like, but I just have so many, sometimes I question things a lot. And I think by questioning is how I learn. I don't know about you, but this is what inspires the insights and my content. And I'm a very curious individual. So I just find that you, knowing you obviously and your journey, you are just a master manifester. You're just a master manifester. Things just appear on your
Um,
path.
I,
It's true.
yeah,
I'm like, how does
I mean that's how it can be perceived. But there's that old debate, like when people are talking about a film um, that seems to imitate life, and they say, is it art that imitates life or life that imitates art? But really, it's life imitating art, imitating life, because the life inspires the art, which in turn inspires, life in people who are familiar. So it looks like, one is manifesting these things, but for me, it's almost like whenever in a situation, it's always try and make the best of that situation. Um, and so, whether it's being, missing a train and you've got time in your hands, like how are you using that time? Um, and so, yeah, the elevator story, it was kind of like you see something, and I could, you're strangers in an elevator, you could just mind your own business and avoid eye contact and not do anything. But you see something, you think, okay, why not? I'll speak to this
can you share
person.
that story so that our listeners know what that story is?
Yeah, so at the time, I was working in litigation practice in New York, and I did not like it. I was not having a but yeah, because what we one was working, we get into the office around 8:30 in the morning and be leaving around 10 p.m. almost every day. So, you're back, you're tired. And so I remember I go back to my building, and yes, I had, business background, but there I was doing more sort of commercial litigation. And I see this guy reviewing an IP licensing agreement. So I thought, well, maybe he's another lawyer. So I say, start making conversation with the guy, and it turns out that he had actually just started a company, and he couldn't find a lawyer, so he's trying to do this, agreement himself. So I was like, oh, I can help you with that. And this guy, is so enthusiastic about it, so grateful. Also because it wasn't part of my firm work, and I was doing litigation, I just helped him pro bono. But I leave thinking, I'm in a city with more lawyers per square mile, in most other cities, and this person is still struggling to find an ideal lawyer to help him with this startup. So, and I think right there and then in that lift, this guy could have hired me then at this hourly rate. So like, there seems to be a market here. Why is there a market, even though there's so many lawyers? What's missing? Um, and that was really kind of the light bulb moment. So, um, you know, I worked for that. This was about a year into working for that practice. I left later, and then when I went back to the States, I set up and designed the practice around, um, startups and so on. But that's when I really got the indication that um, this was something I could do and be good at it. Uh,
Love
but
it.
yeah, I mean, it was chance. If you're in an elevator, how many seconds? You could keep your mouth shut, or you could.
Exactly. It is about, if there is one thing that I have learned, and this is probably, if someone asks me what the key to success is in the startup world, in the entrepreneurial world, and again, there are multiple keys, but my personal key has been, well, myself in a sense. And why I say myself is because my favorite quote is, you are the barrier, but you're also the key. And that empowers me massively, because when certain things aren't going the way I want them to go, I can emotionalize it, which I normally do. I feel, the disappointment, let's call it disappointment. And then I'm like, okay, you've been there, you have felt it. Now what are you going to do with that feeling? Are you going to turn it into something that is a lesson that can help you move the needle, or are you going to let that moment continue to discourage you? Then I become the key. And this is how I've been able to turn obstacles and setbacks into opportunities over and over again. And there have been moments where I have questioned the path, but I have felt this strong, it's almost like a pull in my gut. And I'm so glad that the moments where I felt it was, well, the most testing moments, I didn't give it up, because you wouldn't have this conversation today. And you have been a huge part of the success of the co-created hub, Gabriel, and you know this. Maybe I haven't said this to you enough. I have now learned how to ask for help, but I am not so good at sometimes saying thank you. And now I want to really say it publicly, because when I say help, it has been all those conversations where, when I have felt stuck and I have needed another perspective, you strategically have been able to give me a perspective that has opened my mind and expanded it. And this is precisely why I am really excited about what you're launching next. We didn't speak enough about, your companies, but again, people can always Google you. People know who you are. You have created a massive success. But what I want us to talk about now is the next venture that you're launching, which I absolutely love. And we're going to be offering that also for the Co-Created Hub, which is your legal community, your new membership that targets every step of the entrepreneurial journey from start to scale. And what's unique about the membership is that they have access to personalized legal advice in, like, whenever they need it. And I love that, because sometimes, well, we never have all the answers, and we cannot play with the legal aspect of things. That needs to be on point. So talk to me. I was the first, obviously, client
Yeah,
who tested it. Talk to us about this. When is
yeah.
it
So
launching? What's going to be all about? Everything. Tell us everything.
yeah, so the main idea was, so I set up my practice in New York in 2014. Um, and it's developed over time. What I found is that now, basically you have the traditional model of hourly billing. Um, and it's I've still felt that there were a lot of startups that couldn't afford it, or in a sense didn't have access to it, because the bulk of the new clients they're getting already had investor assistance, or had significant assets to start with. But that's not your typical person. So there's always this question in the back of my mind: how do I make it more accessible? Um, and you know, really, only options were DIY, do it yourself, which doesn't generally yield great results, because, in fact, a lot of the clients I had is because they went down the DIY route, things went wrong, and they need you to, help sort it out. So I was thinking, how could it be done whereby, on the one hand, they get the help that's actually needed? Because the thing with the legal profession is it's precision. you can't really say, oh, this is good enough, because when you really need it, when dispute happens or when things go wrong, it's those fine details that make a big difference. Um, and so on one hand, you need to give them something that's effective, precise enough. On the other hand, it has to be financially viable, so that they can, you know, but the financial whole viability thing is a discussion that's um, it's a long one, because is it really how it depends on how persons perceive the value and so on. Um, but the idea was, how do I make it more accessible? And so what we developed was a membership plan. So on the one hand, removing the financial uncertainty. So with hourly billing, it's person says how much it's going to cost, and you typically give an estimate, and you can find there are, depending on what happens, that estimate could be on the higher end or lower end. But how do you make it certain so they can budget effectively for it? Because a lot of time when the person says they can't afford legal services, that's not so much because they don't have the money, it's because of the budgeting. They would have put that bulk of money into paying for other expenses, but would have, you know, made legal expenses less important. And part of that is because it's that kind of, when people are purchasing legal services, it seems to be a delay between action and consequence, because the real value gets seen, ironically, when things go wrong, and that could be a year, 2 years after the contract is signed. So um, people tend to prioritize, things where the consequences flow quite close to the actual action itself. Um, so going back to budgeting, so the idea was, how do I get billing that's certain, that can be budgeted, ease the budget, but also deliver services that could be effective. So that's why we developed this Startwise membership program, whereby the different levels of membership, and it's geared towards budgets of people with different levels of funding. So whether the person's just bootstrapping, or whether they've got their friends and family around, or whether they've got VC investors, there's a plan for aimed at typically what startups in those at those various stages need, and what their budgets would be able um, to take. So in the membership plans, we have a template library where the person can get DIY access, but also it's important that, yes, a person can try to draft the contract themselves, and you can give them the drafting instructions to do so. But it's generally best that it gets reviewed by a lawyer before it's signed. So we made it easy, whereby it's you can download the templates, do the templates themselves, but then also have it reviewed by a lawyer at a set price with discounted prices and so on. And because a lot of people now are saying, oh, ChatGPT can draft contracts for us and do certain
Yeah.
things. And as we saw, the other time when we had the strategy challenge, that
Yeah.
you had ChatGPT help you draft a contract, and then I looked at it, and then we noticed that there were certain regulatory aspects that hadn't
Yeah.
been taken care of, and we put it back through ChatGPT, and it told you
Exactly.
not to sign the contract that it had drafted for you in the
I
first place.
mean,
Um, so yeah, so, it's important that even if a person tries to draft from a template or something, it's generally good that, because it's not so much what a person knows that gets them, or their inability to apply it, but what they don't know. Um, so the point was, you have the DIY aspects, which helps reduce costs, but at the same time you give easy access to get the documents reviewed at a set price or at low
yeah.
prices, whereby which can cover that risk factor. Because so then in a sense, the hourly billing model becomes more not just skill but convenience. But if a person is prepared to draft a contract themselves, and then you know go to a lawyer for the review aspect. Yeah, and I guess the baseline was, I kind of realized that, yes, there's high level knowledge and skill required when doing these agreements, but when I look at the labor and the time the labor takes, about 80% of that labor is labor that can be done without the skill knowledge. 20% of it is the high end stuff. So if the person handles that, you know lower end bit, and then you get on the review aspect, you deal with the higher end that they can look at and change. Um, that was the way I felt that could make legal services in a sense
Yeah.
more accessible to those who typically would not have been able to afford the firm services.
Well, this is where we align. This is where we align because the mission of the co-created hub is to be the platform where people find the resources, the connections, the support that they need at every stage of their journey, and to be able to grow sustainably profitable businesses and to also grow more holistically. Because again, coming back to what I shared earlier, it's it is not easy building a business that's profitable and that you can sustain yourself, your family from, especially if you're starting from scratch and you don't have the connections and you don't have the network and you don't have the funding or the resources. This is where you need support the most, not just with the business itself but also with your own mindset, with your own energy, because these two need to align: the energetics, the mental, the emotional, even how you take care of yourself physically, and uh, the strategy and how you respond to market needs, how you create your own market in a sense. Because if you are launching a very innovative product, then ultimately you're educating the market why they need your product. And we have founders who are part of the platform who are innovators as well. I am quite excited about this membership, again having tested it in a sense as a real client when I had a real need. And yes, we can experiment with artificial intelligence as much as we want, and it's fun. ChatGPT, I love ChatGPT. ChatGPT is awesome, but we shouldn't forget that this isn't a game. And yes, ChatGPT can help with a lot, but we still need to utilize let's call it the human mind, to anticipate what can go wrong, what the purpose of that agreement is. And also, realistically, as startup founders, we need multiple agreements. You've helped with multiple agreements, like from partnerships to coaching agreements. So I feel at peace knowing that I have legal support and financial guidance support, making the right decisions so that I can stay in my zone of genius as the person that drives the product and the platform. That's why, coming back to collaboration, coming back to support, it is so important to surround yourself with the right people. I have one final question, and then we can wrap the conversation up. We have been working together for about 3 years now, and you're very much behind the scenes. So it took a bit of convincing to get you
Guilty,
to
guilty.
stage. I have been saying, Gabriel, every time we have a conversation, I am like, we should be recording and sharing this. So it's finally happening, and it is going to be on the podcast and obviously shared on the Apple and Spotify accounts, also on YouTube. But speaking about you setting out on your own and following the family kind of path, but not following the family path in a sense, have have there been people who made a big impact on your journey? If you think about the last 10 years, have there been any people who you were like, wow, I'm so glad I met you and you really helped? And what were those?
Yeah,
If you can share examples.
yeah. And there's kind of unexpected. I mean, there's the ones which are obvious, parents in a way, um, and obviously becoming a legal background, they have like an influence that's not really probably fully appreciated a lot of the time. But they're also the unexpected ones. Um, I remember when I was in New York. This is before I set up the practice. I went to, meet a friend of my dad's who was a lawyer, very senior maritime lawyer. He was like president of the Maritime Law Association in the US and so on. And it was one of those things where it's kind of like, my dad was talking too much and he happens to mention to this guy who's, oh, my son's in New York. So it's kind of like, oh, I don't really want to, but it's like my dad's already said so and it's rude if I don't go and see him. So it wasn't a meeting where I needed something or like a benefit. It was just a general, get to know chat. And so we're talking, and he's got this large firm, and I was saying, I had this, I was working at this litigation practice before, and he was like, "What a waste! Set up on your own." And I looked at this guy and like, this is insane. Like, I'm not from this country. I'm not. Well, this was in New York. I'm not from New York. I don't have a client base there. You know, I most of my legal training was in the UK. Yes, I was a licensed New York attorney, but I didn't really have that much experience at the time. How does one? And also, I was kind of In England, through legal practice, kind of indoctrination, because you have this thing called a training contract. So it's kind of you don't qualify until you've worked in the place. And so for me, I hadn't done a US equivalent of a training contract. So the idea of just setting up an event just seemed crazy. But then I'm also thinking, look at this person. If it was someone else saying that, but this is a very senior person who had been practicing for about 40 years. He had seen just about, he had advised presidents and so on. And so I was like, okay, if he was truly crazy, um, and so I got to think about it. And the question, which was initially, and that's the thing, the question where you doubt yourself is why. But then when you start to look at possibilities, it becomes why not? Um, and so I shifted from saying, why should I do this? So why not? What's stopping me? What are the hurdles? And what are the barriers? And are they really barriers or are they just hurdles? But I think that conversation was key. Because yeah, I guess if it had come from, someone else, I've been thinking, this guy's crazy. What's he talking about? Um, and the irony is that I don't think it was, that person's intention to, you know, set me on the journey it has. It's just one of those comments or one of those
Yeah.
that has an impact beyond, what one was expecting or what.
It opens
Um,
your mind. It opens your mind to what's possible when you take that risk. Because
Correct.
entrepreneurship is very much about taking risks.
Yeah, and a lot of things, when you look at barriers, when you start to look at the details, that's when you start, because anything can look like a major challenge, but when you look at details and break things down, that's when you start to see, but, there's that emotional, oh, it's a barrier, so I'm not even going to bother. But
Yeah.
when you say, okay, I'm investing the effort, I'm investing the time, you start to look at the details, and that's when possibilities start to, and there's that kind of emotional rush where it's kind of, you start to see possibility where you felt things were impossible before.
Yeah.
And that's a really powerful motivator to keep on going in. So yeah, I think that was a major influence for me.
Coming back to the people we meet, right place, right time, synchronicities, but also what we make out of these conversations, what we make out of these encounters. And that could be an opportunity or it can be a setback. Irrespective, you can turn it into an opportunity, whether it's from the perspective of learning or from the perspective of achieving a milestone or getting the inspiration to just keep going when you need it the most, or a seed gets planted in your mind and you're like, yeah, let's do it. With that being said, I always end these conversations with a quote. What is your favorite quote? A quote that inspires you the most, a quote that you live by. Currently, for me, my quote is, I'm the barrier, but I'm also the key. I'm both the barrier and the key, and I have a choice. That empowers me. What empowers you?
I'm not sure the source of this quote. Some people attribute it to Walt Whitman, but that's been challenged. But nonetheless, it's one that I guess I live by, and that's be curious, not judgmental. Um, and that's, I guess, is how one is able to fight through a lot of, doubts with regards to bias or self-imposed limitations and so on. Because if you're curious about things and you ask the right questions, you'll eventually see the path.
Love it. Be curious. Don't be judgmental. If you feel other people are judging you, let them focus on the value, focus on what you're here to create and bring into the world, and surround yourself with the right people. Speaking about the right people, last thing I want to announce, which is quite exciting, is that Gabriel, obviously, he's part of the network. He's going to be launching his own circle and the Entrepreneur Legal Circle on the Co-Created Hub. You will be able to also sign up for his membership when it goes live. Please follow him on LinkedIn so that you don't miss the news. And you and I had a conversation about having these conversations live in your circle, maybe once a quarter. And now I'm going to get you to publicly make a promise that we can have these conversations. You're not getting away with what you told me last week. Do not backtrack. Well, I'm keeping you accountable here. So can we have these
I think
conversations?
the word if was used in there. I think it was slightly qualified. There wasn't an absolute guarantee, but yeah, we'll definitely
Then
see
people
what we
can
do.
ask you questions straight away and we can have podcast conversations live. Of course, this podcast episode is going to be recorded and shared. And I've truly enjoyed it. Thank you so much for always being yourself. Thank you for agreeing to taking part in the podcast. And yeah, I'm looking forward to continue to working with you and to what the future holds, both for the Co-Created Hub and for Entrepreneur Legal.
All right. Well, thank you for having me, and yeah, very much look forward to collaborating with Co-Created Hub on this new venture.